Valley's people, it's episode 3 and it's replay to be advised.
Hello and welcome again to the Valley's People. Now today we're going to meet a man who, if you remember 6:35 p.m. on a Sunday night during the war years, you may well remember this long-running Australian radio program. And also we're going to meet Olivia Newton-John's dad. Hope you can stay with us. Thanks for joining us for the Valley's People. Today we have a very special celebrity, someone who had a radio program in Australia, over 35 ABC stations, for 3 years. A cinema organist from Salamander Bay, Rupert Hayes. Welcome to the Valley's People.
Thanks, Ron. Thank you.
Rupert, not very many people can make that sort of claim. They have a radio show for so long, over such a vast network, and I think shortwave as well, is that right?
Yes, yes, Radio Australia.
Called Forces Sing Song. Now, what actually is the Forces Sing Song? What was it?
Well, let's take it from the top. In 1939, I was appointed organist at the Regent Theatre in Brisbane. This was just a fortnight before the opening of the war.
Oh, really? A nice welcome?
Yes, I'll say. Well, needless to say, in 1942, when the Japanese entered the war, there were many troops in Brisbane. General MacArthur had his headquarters there,
right,
and the place was just bristling with GIs as well as other Allied folk. At the time, we were screening from Monday to Saturday inclusively, and Brisbane being quite a sleepy old hole of a Sunday night, the troops really had nothing to do at all. So Hoyts decided to open the theatre for screenings exclusively for the troops. And of course it was my job to entertain them prior to the screenings. Well, just to say play a few little ditties to them would have been possibly all right, but I felt that they would enjoy themselves much greater if they participated. So I had all the words of the songs of the day put onto slides and flashed on the screen, and I invited the boys to sing.
A one-man morale booster.
That's right. Well, it didn't take much cajoling for them to sing, for the simple reason that they felt they wanted to do their little bit. And by 6:45, with 3,000 troops there, they just brought the house down. It was quite a thrill to turn around and see such a sea of faces. They were even sitting on the steps, just from wall to wall. It was just bodies.
Incredible.
And
how did the radio broadcast begin, Rupert?
well, it was only about 2 or 3 weeks after this that the ABC got wind of just what was going on inside the Regent, and they made a pilot tape. When I say tape, that's slightly wrong, because tape recorders weren't even invented.
Shows you how we take things for granted, though, doesn't it?
That's right. They used to be put onto the big 16-inch acetate discs. Well, they made a pilot in a couple of these shows, sent them to Sydney, and to make a long story short, it was put on 35 stations throughout Australia, as well as Radio Australia.
And that was every Sunday night,
Every
at
Sunday
6:35 for
That's
3
right.
years, 4
That's
years.
right, yes.
Wow.
And of course, needless to say, you might say, well, now how many people were watching the show? Well, I would say millions, by virtue of the fact that it wasn't long before I was getting letters from all over the South Pacific. Mostly from boys in mud dugouts, base hospitals, Morotai, various places, saying that they listen to the show, enjoy it, this makes their day. And my mum, in one particular case, she was living in Perth, and this chappie wrote and said, well, it's her birthday on such and such a day. Would you please get the boys to sing Silver Threads Among the Gold? I wrote back and said, yes, sure do. And we got the boys on the mat to tell them exactly they had to really sing. This was a special.
Yes.
This was the first request. And they sang their heads off. And a fortnight after, I get a letter from a lady in Perth saying, it's Willie's birthday on such a day. His favourite song is X, you see. Well, it worked out that way that I was more or less, shall we say, a liaison officer between mother and son out of the whole South Pacific.
Yeah.
I got quite a kick out of that, as you can imagine.
I bet you did. I think we can all remember, or some of us can remember, community singing, but when you take 3,000 troops every Sunday night, something like an audience, a physical audience of 400,000.
That's right.
Well, that's getting to proportions that are just
A lot
gigantic.
of people. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Did you get to meet many of the American and
No,
Australian
unfortunately,
troops?
Ron, no. By virtue of the fact that I was playing when they entered the theatre,
Oh, yes.
and when the Fox Membertone newsreel went on, well, I just disappeared in the bowels of the earth and went home. So I never had a chance to fraternise with them at all. A pity. They seem to be a nice bunch of fellows.
Yes. What is a Wurlitzer organ then, Rupert? What attracted all this attention?
A Wurlitzer organ is virtually an orchestral organ. The name Wurlitzer is a trade brand, so people associate orchestral organs with, oh, that's a Wurlitzer, but it's in the same category as the player piano. Everybody calls it a pianola, by virtue of the fact that the first trade name of the player piano was a pianola. Nevertheless,
I was just going to say, how big then is a Wurlitzer?
oh, they're gigantic. They're gigantic. There's thousands of pipes. And what makes them so different from the conventional church organ, they're voiced on heavy wind pressure, and they're beefy and gutsy. And they have orchestral voices like saxophones and trumpets and clarinets, the mellow strings and various other instruments. But the most amazing part of the whole setup in the chambers is the percussion side. Because in those days, there was no such thing as the automation of just pressing a button on an auto rhythm on an organ. The actual genuine instruments were there. There was the, like the bass drum, for instance. They'd have a big Salvation Army drum there with a beater going like this, worked on a solenoid principle.
I mean, it was a drum.
It was an actual drum.
Oh, really?
And the side drum was like a kettle drum, or shall I say a side drum, on an easel with two sticks like this. And they worked more or less, when you pressed a note, it would reiterate. And then you get the you see? The same way as the xylophone. It was a fair dingham xylophone, a deacon. And even the cathedral chimes. They were chimes 6 feet square, just like you see in the symphony orchestra. All hit with little metal bars, all controlled from the console.
Will that ever be back, Rupert? That?
Well, it's a bit prohibitive cost-wise, because you can imagine I've just touched just a little bit on the mechanical side of it. But when you come to consider that the organ in the region was put in 1931 at a cost of £35,000.
Yeah.
You see, that
I
they could
couldn't
afford,
imagine how much it would be.
well, they could
worth
afford it in those days for the simple reason there used to be queues all around the place. 90% of the entertainment for the masses in those days were the pictures, and they made a bundle, and they could even afford their 30 and 40 piece orchestras. But with so much entertainment in the world today, as you've got your clubs, and your pubs, and all your discos and things, there's such a variety.
But what fascinated you in the Wurlitzer, Rupert? How did you get into this cinema organ scene?
Well, it goes back a long, long way, Ron. As I say, I can
Take
remember.
me back.
I can remember way back in 1923. I was just 10 at the time. Mum and Dad took me along to the Prince Edward Theatre in Sydney. And Eddie Horton was playing the organ then. He opened it. And I just sat there goggle-eyed. I thought, well, now, this is for me. one day I'm going to sit on that seat. And in 12 years after that, I was sitting on that seat, but not the Prince Edward seat, an organ twice the size. So at least I realised my ambition. And
Well,
I've kept it going ever since.
I was going to say, I hope the people at the Salamander Bay Hotel, where you now sort of just keep practising on electronic organs, do you?
That's right.
I hope they understand your determination when they dine there. Rupert Hayes, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks, Ron. It's been a pleasure.
And now in the Valley's People, in just a moment, we're going to meet Professor Newton-John. And welcome back to the Valley's People. The next guest is Professor Newton-John, and I guess I owe him an apology because you must just be about ready to clobber the next person who introduced you as Olivia Newton-John's dad.
Yes.
I'm terribly sorry.
No, well, I mean, that's all right. I think she gets just as fed up when people say, is your father really Vice-Chancellor of Sydney and Melbourne, which has happened more than once? And was your grandfather a Nobel Prize winner? And I think she gets fed up with this too. But still, we're proud of each other, you see.
Yes, but I guess as someone who's nurtured so many students through university, that's hardly a fitting introduction. But I'll tell you what did fascinate me over this past 18 months or so, and that was the discovery of your work with British secret intelligence during the war.
Yeah.
Why have we only learnt about this recently?
Well, because of the Official Secrets Act, you see. There was we had to swear that unless we kept our trap shut, you know, we'd be shot at dawn if we mentioned anything about it. And after 30 years, this Official Secrets Act is inoperative. And I was as shaken as anybody could be when I saw items on television, I saw articles in newspapers about Enigma. Because for 30 years, one had kept absolutely dead silent about it, never mentioned it to anybody.
But you can dine on it now, can't you? I mean, Churchill's papers and your memoirs together.
Yes, but still, one still has that feeling that one's going to be shot if one talks about it, you know. I feel very uncomfortable about it, actually.
You were involved in interrogation, is that right? Is that the
right? I was an interrogation officer for 2 years before I was seconded to Ultra, yeah.
Interrogation of whom?
German Air Force.
Uh-huh. I guess we're conditioned a little bit by the Hollywood movie, you know. We have ways of making you talk. Is that the way it goes?
Not at all. No, we stuck entirely to the Geneva Convention, and if we got them to talk, we got them to talk by being nice to them on the whole, rather than by being bullies. I don't think I'd have made a very good bully in any case.
Where were you when this happened? Was it what
there
sort
was
of court?
There was a huge house that used to belong to that great merchant banker, Sir Philip Sassoon, just on the outskirts of London at Cockfosters. And this was taken over by what was called CASDIC, Combined Services Detailed Interrogation Centre. This was manned by the army. They ran it. And they could well afford to run it because they never had any prisoners, you see, for a long time. There was a naval detachment which once got an Italian submarine, and those chaps were terribly nice, and they talked and talked and talked and talked. But the Air Force had the main job because, after all, German planes were shot down over Britain. And we had a series. I find myself lapsing now into the jargon of the section. We had branch managers scattered all over the country. That's what they were called, and it was their job to do a preliminary interrogation of live airmen.
Yes.
And in the case where the airmen weren't live, to get all the papers and everything else and send them in to us. And they'd phone through a report, and then the CO would decide whether we wanted to see these people or whether we didn't. And if they came from a squadron that we'd from which we'd had a lot of people in the last 3 or 4 months, then obviously we couldn't waste time talking to them. But if they were fairly senior officers, then obviously we wanted to see them. And if they came from a unit about which we knew little, we wanted to see them. And so they were sent down to us. And then we interrogated.
Abiding by the Geneva Convention.
Yeah.
And the German airmen in the main, I guess, came from the upper strata, shall we say, of German social life. Would that be right?
Well, some of them did. A number of the officers early in the war had joined the Air Force in order to avoid the Nazi Party, in a way, to get right out of it. Yeah. And but there were a number of fairly fervent Nazis among them too, and those on the whole were much easier to deal with than the what one might call the officer-gentleman type.
Right, but if I'm, shall we say, Heinrich Schultz parading before you, and I give you Einstein's drei and no more, rank and serial
your name,
number.
your rank, your serial number.
Okay,
yes.
now, well, all right. As a German citizen, what's your next question?
No, you're the German citizen.
Yes.
I'm the interrogator.
Right, but me as the German citizen.
My next question is something absolutely way out from operational matters or service matters. I would say, has your flight sergeant still got that girl at number 27 Whatnot Street? And has the squadron leader's dog got over what it said it caught from a lamppost, and bits of squadron gossip? And you'd gone, you wouldn't ask any questions at this stage, for heaven's sake. I mean, because if you said, how does your bomb site work or what, then you stiffen their backs. I mean, this is what they're expecting.
Yeah.
And so they say, my name is, my rank is, my number is. So you say, the sanitation, a lot of German squadrons had sanitation sergeants, and it was their job to see that the chaps didn't catch, or if they did, that it was treated, and to keep an eye on the local brothels and so on. And they used to issue tickets. See, this was terribly valuable because you knew where he'd been and whom he'd seen and the dates and the times, and you knew from other chaps from the same squadron they'd been to the same whorehouse. And all this was very, very valuable information.
Yeah. So the guard would drop through this enormous cross-reference.
You've gone a long time like this, asking apparently irrelevant and pointless questions, but all the time you were showing them that you knew a great deal about their unit. So when you dropped a hint as to what modifications they might have made to a Sperry bomb site for a Ju-88, they assumed that you knew that too. So there was no point in not disclosing it.
And this was gradual build-up of information.
Oh yes, yes. You couldn't. You couldn't go in and bully. You'd get nothing because you stiffened their backbone by doing that. And what you wanted was to soften it.
Where did you learn this German lifestyle?
Oh, I suppose from the time I was 14, I discovered at 12 that I had a gift for German. And at 14, I went to Germany for the first time, and from then on, I went, that was from England, of course, yes. I went every year, and sometimes twice a year, and I stayed with almost every section of society, from the very high Prussian aristocracy to a postman in Cologne, and middle-class people, clerks and doctors, and professors and working men, and so I saw a fair slice of German life, and I also learned, which was important, I learned the different languages spoken at the different strata, and that's how it all started.
Did you develop in that time respect for the German people? Did that make your work during the war harder or easier now on reflection?
I don't know. I think in the interrogation situation, one was dealing with human beings, and human beings who were, to a certain extent, distressed, obviously. They were POWs, they'd been shot down. And I think one assessed them. This was part of the whole trouble with the job, that you inevitably assessed them as human beings, and some were nice, and some were absolutely ghastly, just like human beings anywhere. And at the same time, you had to think, these are the enemy, and I've got to get this information. And to get that information, you were on the whole nice to them, and the more information you were likely to get, the nicer you were.
Yeah.
And that made you feel a right bastard, you know, it really did, because you were just exploiting the liking that these chaps were getting for you, and you were trying to make them like you, so you could get more out of them. You know, it was a dirty job.
Yeah. I would guess, Professor, though,
job,
that there were some that you just couldn't get anything out of. Rank serial.
None, absolutely none.
What did you do in that case, sir?
Nothing.
You sent them away?
Just sent them away, yes. Couldn't afford to keep them if they weren't going to talk, so off they went to Canada. I met one here in Newcastle, actually. It was a great relief to me and to him that he'd said nothing during the war. He turned up here as the German Consul General in Sydney, and he came up for some do at the German department at the university. And we eyed each other throughout this meal, thinking, you know, I met you somewhere before, and after the meal we went off and had a drink together, and eventually it came out. And he was one of those who was clever enough to say, my name is, my rank is, my number is, and smile. And there was nothing you could do about it. He would not be involved in any flippant talk or irrelevancies. He just said, my name is, my rank is. There's nothing you could do, so off to Canada he went.
Yes, a diplomat all the way.
Diplomat all the way. He was a very clever fellow.
Yeah. In war terms, if we could express it like that, what were the most significant events of the work that you were taking part in, Professor?
Oh, well, obviously Ultra was the most significant thing. I mean, when you were reading, we were reading mainly German Air Force signals and reading them currently so that they were on our desks within a few minutes of their being on the desks of the German officers to whom they'd been sent. And, well, you can imagine what an immense advantage it is, particularly because in the early part of the war, Britain was outnumbered, outgunned, out everything, to know what the intentions of the enemy were, what his shipping losses were, what his Air Force losses were, what his factory losses were, all sorts of industrial detail as well as operational detail. And I think without doubt, and I say this not because I was involved in it, but I think that without Ultra, we'd have had no hope of winning the war at all. None at all.
But to break codes, I mean, current codes must certainly be the advantage, mustn't they?
Oh, it was fantastic. One offshoot of Ultra, oddly enough, was the first computer ever built.
Really?
Yeah, there was a chance. I think the chances were 4 million to 1 against getting in, you know, into the code. And there was a certain human error in this which made it a bit easier. But they built a huge computer which was mechanical. You know, it was absolutely enormous, took up a whole wall of a hut, an enormous great thing. And that was the first computer, and this cracked red, as the code name for German Air Force traffic was. It was cracking it currently, you know, as it came in, went into the thing, bong, and out it came at the other end. Fantastic.
Yes, and a fantastic story. I wish we could talk for more. Professor Newton-John, thank you.
No, he's right. No problem.
Yeah.
You're just doing that.
I think it was the second interview. Yeah,
come back.
that's the last. Yeah, right.
Yeah, no problem.
So
No
worth doing that
problem
one
at all.
again. Our guests today have been Rupert Hayes and Professor Newton-John. I hope you can join me on the next show when we meet more of the Valley's people. Goodbye for now.